site of one of the largest deposits of copper in the world, and target of one of the largest single developments ever undertaken in a foreign country by private United States capital. Toquepala's copper, more than 400 million tons of it, lies buried in the high canyons of southern Peru, 2 miles high, in fact. It has rested there since a world in the making churned up that formidable ridge we now know as the Andes Mountains, the backbone of South America. Toquepala's copper was there ages before even the legends of the ancient Inca nation were born, challenging men to come and get it. And now men have come, and they are getting it. They are crushing it into usable form, carrying it down more than 100 miles of rugged, twisting grade carved out of volcanic canyons. They are smelting it and sending it out to the world for other men to make into wire and pipe and pennies and kettles and weapons of defense. The men who came to get the copper of Toquepala had to come a long way, for Peru is a long way from home, and Toquepala lies almost at the southern tip of that land of the Incas. It lies in a rugged, arid section of Peru close to the Chilean border, 700 miles south of the capital city of Lima, more than 1,000 miles south of the equator. Here in a land where winter comes in the summer and the sun shines in the north, it can be stifling hot and dusty with less than 4 inches of rainfall a year. Or the fog can roll in and drench the plateaus that lie back from the coastline at the foot of the mountains, turning the dry land into a great bed of flowers, a welcome wonder of this arid world. Up in the mountains, sudden rain squalls can coat the barren peaks with snow, and the temperature may drop far below zero at night. This is the land into which men came to accept the challenge of the copper that had lain so long under a mountain near Toquepala Peak. They came in by land, air, and sea, but they had to unload their machines and materials at the little coastal town of Ilo, where there was no place for seagoing ships to dock. They'd have to start from scratch, build a pier and shops and buildings. They'd have to convert an old road into a highway solid enough for the heavy transportation needed to turn Toquepala into the 3rd largest open-pit copper mine in the world. They'd have to build a more modern and longer railroad than the one used by this ingenious little workhorse on wheels in order to bring thousands of tons of copper ore down from the new mill to the smelter and the pier. But after they had built these shops and plants, these roads and railroads, men would need better places to live than their rough early camps. They would need attractive homes, places to relax, hospitals to care for their bodily ills, churches in which they could worship, and schools for their children. This then was the target at Toquepala, a completely integrated mining community built for the decades and decades during which men would be mining the copper that had waited for countless centuries to be put to man's good use. This was the target, and this is the story of how that target was hit dead center by the planning and direction of 4 leaders in the world's non-ferrous metals industry: American Smelting and Refining Company, Cerro de Pasco Corporation, Newmont Mining Corporation, and Phelps Dodge Corporation, joined together in the Toquepala project as Southern Peru Copper Corporation. But just as there was an industrial target, so was there a target date. This also is the story of how a joint venture selected by Southern Peru Copper Corporation, a venture composed of Utah Construction Company and Morrison-Knudsen Company, with Utah Construction Company as managing sponsor, completed the mammoth construction program 8 months ahead of schedule and within the target estimate of cost, a rare achievement for a project of this magnitude. It is an industrial success story, a story of intricate planning, difficult logistics, and an all-out construction effort through which, over a period of less than 4 years, Utah Construction Company was able to bring to productive reality the enterprise and foresight of the men who guide the fortunes of Southern Peru Copper Corporation. The Toquepala story started for Utah Construction Company in 1952, when it was engaged by American Smelting and Refining Company to supervise and coordinate the overall planning and scheduling. 15 months later, the studies of hundreds of field men and engineers in Peru, San Francisco, and New York were embodied in a voluminous and complete cost estimate as a basis for Southern Peru's budgeting and financing, important support for which was provided by the Export-Import Bank. Costs had been arrived at after exhaustive studies of Peruvian laws, customs, labor regulations, social benefits, taxes, transportation, living and working standards, all of which had to be incorporated into the master project plan. On March 7, 1956, Utah and MK signed a contract to start construction operations exactly 1 month later. The target date for completion at Toquepala was May 1, 1960. The ore body, a porphyry copper deposit, lies approximately 60 air miles inland and about 11,000 feet above sea level. In 1957, Southern Peru Copper Corporation was already carrying out benching operations under the shadow of Toquepala Peak in the background. About 2 miles southwest of the mine and 500 feet lower, Utah would build the heart of the Toquepala project, the great crushers and the concentrator, with a 30,000-ton daily capacity. Also the vital service shops and the administration buildings. Living quarters for some 10,000 people, employees and their families, would go up in this same valley. Down at Ilo, some 110 miles away at the ocean end of the new highway and railroad, would rise the new smelter and power plant. There also would be the new pier and another complete community for some 2,300 persons, more than tripling the population of the little town. The smelter process requires quantities of lime, an ample source of which is found in the coquina beds about 10 miles south of Ilo. Building a project as vast and remote as Toquepala requires the logistics, the coordinated planning and timing of a military campaign. Staff headquarters were established near the mine at a spot the Indians called Incapuquio, or water wells. Until completion of the project, this area, seen here in February '57, would be the nerve center for the entire construction operation. One of the most important of the early structures was the Besser block plant. This remarkable plant was designed to produce all the concrete blocks to be used in the project's many houses, plants, schools, and other buildings. It produced its first block on November 25, 1956. Operating at 3 times the speed of most such plants, it produced in all nearly 8 million blocks. Thousands of these have been stockpiled for use in future buildings and repairs throughout the Toquepala project. The target of all this planning and construction, of course, is the millions of tons of copper buried near Toquepala Peak. But to uncover all those 400 million plus tons, it would be necessary during 50 or 100 years or more to strip off millions of tons of covering waste material. While this stripping of the overburden went ahead, Utah Construction Company crews were placing the concrete and erecting the steel for the shops that would provide all the multitudinous fabricating jobs, the repairs, and the general maintenance activities so vital to the construction and operation of a mine like Toquepala. Near these shops, the mine offices are going up. Power for the electric shovels comes from this diesel power plant. Completed by July of '57, this plant also served as a temporary power source for construction in the general mine. That same month, Utah completed the T-shaped truck repair shop, a hefty structure into which went 285 tons of steel and 120 tons of metal siding and roofing. By March 12th of 1958, this key mine shop area, a major construction job in itself, had been completed and turned over to the owner. And another step had been taken in the long process of turning Toquepala's ore into useful copper. At the other end of the line, along the seacoast at Ilo, the front door of Toquepala was open and busy. Not many months before, Ilo had looked like this, a small coastal village dating back to the days when Spain ruled Peru. Then one day in 1956, the ships started pulling in, after a 4,000-mile journey down from the States. They anchored not far offshore, where the water is deep enough for safe moorage, and the lighters began bringing in the tons of steel and machinery, the fuel and explosives, the food, and the big burly cats that would carve a road up to the mine. It looked like a World War II beachhead. Through the months, Utah MK barges were unloading the 161,000 tons of materials that were to be cleared through customs at a 30-acre storage area and moved to the job sites before the pier was ready to receive its first ship. During this time, contractors were pushing the permanent pier toward completion. Finished in September of 1957, this 593-foot reinforced concrete structure could serve 2 ships at a time. October 12, 1957 was a notable day at Ilo, for on that Saturday the first ship tied up at the new pier. She was the Santa Olivia, and about the only accolade she got or wanted came from the crews that lost no time in unloading her cargo. A few days later, the Gulf Merchant came in, the 3rd vessel to use the new pier. The second one, the Santa Catalina, already is unloading at the right. Much of this cargo, however, still was 100 miles away from the job sites where it was needed. In the beginning, there was little more than a dusty jeep trail. To carry the 300,000 tons of machinery, material, and fuel that eventually were to be hauled over it, the old road would have to be widened and strengthened from sea level to 17,000 feet, higher than any peak in the United States except Alaska's Mount McKinley. In order to get these roads ready for the heavy hauling, the highway crews had to battle dust and heat and sometimes fog to widen and level out the existing road as nearly as possible to a nominal 16-foot width and a maximum grade of 10% compensated. It was tough, rugged work, but supplies had to keep moving, and they did. While the road builders were doing their job, the heavy machinery crews supervised by MK were carving out more than 100 miles of 3% railroad grade, some of the toughest railroad construction in the world. From the mine area, the railroad route makes its tortuous way through steep canyons, down across an upper plateau, and then farther on down through the lower mountains, across the coastal plateau and into Ilo. To complete it, the excavation crews would blast and move nearly 10 million cubic yards of rock and earth, cutting the grade through solid rock, lava flow, and practically every sort of mountain terrain. They would cross many canyons and gullies with fill. When the first of 330,000 railroad ties were unloaded at Ilo on October 20th of 1956, the field surveys were 10% complete. By the middle of 1958, the excavation crews were hitting a peak of more than 500,000 cubic yards a month and were 3/4 of the way to the finish line. Close behind the excavation crews came the track layers, and behind them the line ballast was being spread to give the rails their finishing touch. All the ballast used was produced on the project by this ballast plant, seen here at kilometer 152 and used also at two other locations, as the work went up and up through the rugged flanks of the Andes. By October of 1958, just 610 days after they started, the crews had put in place 20,000 tons of rails, spikes, tie plates, and other steel, and had brought the railroad up to the mill area. We're laying the last of 120 miles of modern railroad, which only 2 years before had been just a dusty canyon side and a stack of drawings and figures. The completion of any railroad, whatever its purpose, is a cause for celebration, for the driving of that last spike, and Toquepala's railroad was no exception. On November 17, 1958, the first train came in from Ilo to be greeted by project workers, staff, and officials, and by Peruvian dignitaries. The Bishop of Tacna offered the invocation. Mr. Edward McL. Titman spoke as president and on behalf of Southern Peru Copper Corporation, whose foresight and enterprise had brought this great mining project into being. He extended thanks and congratulations to the more than 2,500 persons whose cooperative effort resulted in a railroad job well done, the sort of cooperative effort that would continue to be needed before the Toquepala mine could at last begin to produce copper. Peru's official representative, the Peruvian Minister of Development of Resources, Don Eduardo Dibos Damart, praised the Peruvian workers and welcomed the Toquepala project as a notable contribution to his country's national economy. Then, at the invitation of Mr. Titman, Don Eduardo drove into its historic place a copper spike, symbolic of the copper target of Toquepala. It was a great day, all right, when the railroad began to cut travel time to Ilo to just 6 hours instead of a hard day's drive. But the Toquepala project also had a means of making the trip as the crow flies in just 1/2 hour. Southern Peru's 4-place Helio Courier plane. No hefty hauler of equipment or tons of ore, this sturdy craft is designed for the trickier job of flying management and staff personnel between sea level Ilo to such lofty destinations as the mine 2 miles up in the Andes and the Lake Suche Reservoir even higher up. It is no helicopter, but given a good headwind, the plane actually took off and land almost without run. It is a natural for high altitude operation. The Suche Reservoir, for instance, is 14,500 feet above sea level, possibly the highest regularly used commercial landing spot in the world. When you land at Suche, you're standing 5 feet higher in the sky than you would be if you had just struggled to the top of California's highest peak, Mount Whitney. Another of the plane's regular stops is the mine and mill staff camp area. As early as October of 1957, many of the housing units were occupied. Walls of other units were going up and utility lines being excavated. All communities need schools, and the Toquepala towns have theirs. This is the staff camp's permanent school under construction. Closer to the mines are the camps for skilled employees and laborers, made up of 234 multiple unit structures of 1-, 2-, and 3-room dwelling units, as they appeared in September of 1958. Each will house 8 semi-skilled workers' families in 2- and 3-room quarters. All the needs of comfortable modern housing are being provided for Southern Peru's permanent workers. Their quarters are built on concrete foundation slabs with concrete block walls and concrete slab roofs, supported by precast concrete joists or steel beams. All buildings have steel sash and wood doors. Excavation construction of benches and foundations continues as the earlier units near completion. In addition to the housing areas, there is the plaza area, linking the skilled workers and laborers' camps. In July of 1957, crews were making progress on the hotel, restaurant, department store, and market, for this is indeed a complete community. As the months rolled on, construction of plaza buildings clicked off with timetable precision. All of this construction work was done by Peruvian labor under the supervision of Utah staff members. The Peruvians are hard and willing workers and do their jobs well once they learn how to use modern machines and techniques. Utah's construction workers began early in 1957 the task of excavating to make room for the main machine shop and for shops for the carpenters, the painters and tinsmiths, the garage repair men who would be servicing the gigantic mill and other project plants. The excavation crews would in all move nearly 3 million cubic yards to make a place for the big muscles of the mill area, the primary and secondary crushers, and the grinding bay of the concentrator. But to build these great plants which will grind the ore, you need basic materials, like the aggregate being turned out at this plant, with its own crusher to reduce base material brought in from a pit in the floor of the canyon above, and its conveyors, bins, and classifiers, and the stockpiles that supply aggregate for the concrete block plant, and the plant in which workers fabricate and assemble the important steel reinforcing for the 1,200 feet of precast concrete joists that came out of this plant every day. Building an entire mining installation is hard, tough work, but it's not all work. Payday does finally come. Incidentally, the type of work each man does is indicated by the color of his hat. But if payday and getting away for a weekend at home are fun, how about a national holiday celebrated right here on the project in the beautiful new plaza? Especially Independence Day in July, when with colorful pageantry, Peruvians commemorate the defeat of Spain by Simón Bolívar and the recognition of their nation's own Declaration of Independence in 1824. Timetables take over again. And the mill continues to take shape from the primary crusher to the concentrator and the mill shops area. In the plaza area, the nurses' quarters, hospital, and skilled workers area are keeping pace. One of the 1.5 million gallon water reservoir tanks is complete, and the concentrator is progressing with final excavation underway. As the excavation was completed, the placing of what eventually would be a total of 78,000 cubic yards of lean concrete backfill and 85,000 cubic yards of foundation and other concrete continued on schedule. Were lacing the sky with their beams and girders, a total of 7,000 tons of metal in this mill area alone. This girder is being raised for the traveling crane that will operate in the grinding bay of the 600 by 180-foot concentrator building. By September 18, 1958, Foundations had been fitted with equipment for the grinding mills. A few months later, the men were setting in place the 14 huge mills, each of which weighs 170,000 pounds, as much as one of the new diesel locomotives that will be pulling ore on the Toquepala Railroad. The big crane set these giant 800 horsepower units down as gently as a mother laying a baby in its crib. The concentrate that comes from the mill is turned into blister copper at the smelter, most intricate of the project plants. By mid-57, the foundation exploration pits had been excavated, and 6 months later, the excavators were getting well along toward the total of 630,000 cubic yards that would be moved on this smelter site. A byproduct of the excavation was this unexpected display of Indian worker humor, an ancient burial custom turned into a wry tribute to the big boss. Steel, meanwhile, was going up for the shop building, always a key part of any construction job. This smelter has been designed to handle 1,200 tons of concentrates in a 24-hour day and produce from this copper concentrate approximately 300 tons of bullion. Heat from the flue gases of the two reverberatory furnaces will be used to generate steam for the powerhouse in 4 waste heat boilers and then discharged through a 360-foot stack to be erected on the foundation in the foreground. A stack similar to this converter stack in process of construction. By December 1958, the smelter was beginning to take on its final form. Lime fluxing materials needed in the smelting process will be washed and crushed in the plant erected here. Adjacent to the smelter, the power-producing center of the project also was going up. A modern 45,000 kilowatt capacity plant. That capacity was established on the basis of load studies of the project's various areas, with a 15,000 kilowatt safety margin to ensure continuous operation and maximum flexibility. The boilers supplying the turbines of the hydrogen-cooled generators are oil-fired. And to provide for the unloading of the fuel oil, Utah construction crews welded together on the coastal plain 2 continuous steel pipes 2,200 feet long to form a submarine pipeline. A 50-ton winch on a barge was linked to the pipes by a tow line attached to a bridle arrangement. With two-way radio communication providing instant control of all operations, the pipe moved into the waves. On shore, a tractor served as a brake as the 100-ton double pipe moved forward over rollers. The large pipe, 12 inches in diameter, is the main fuel intake. The other is a 6-inch flushing line that is used to clear the big pipe after unloading has been completed. Just 4 hours after the operation started, the pipeline was safely in its permanent position on the ocean bed. To get power to the mill site, a transmission line had to be constructed on the most direct route possible, regardless of the ruggedness of the terrain. Some 418 pole structures similar to this 70-foot 5-pole one are needed to carry this 115 kilovolt line 107 kilometers, 64 miles, to the mill. This essential electrical power will bring the Toquepala project near its production target. But one key item must also be supplied: water. Toquepala's few streams bring sufficient water from the melting snows of the Andes for the local herdsmen and farmers. But the new mine has a tremendous thirst of 8,000 gallons of water a minute. Water for the smelter, power plant, camps, and port facilities at Ilo will be supplied by wells located 2 miles inland in the flood basin of the Ilo River. It will be pumped to 2 reservoirs above the camp and smelter areas. So steep was the grade at one place that Utah crews had to assemble the 12-inch pipe atop the plateau and lower it to the well 520 feet below. From the top of this slope, the line will carry the water to a treatment plant. To provide sufficient water for the mine area, Utah MK engineers had to go high into the Andes to the headwaters of the Toquepala and Asana rivers. Here a cutoff road is being constructed from the upper Toquepala Valley to Lake Suche, crossing a divide 17,000 feet above sea level. These higher valleys are inhabited not only by Indians, but by serene and amiable llamas. From June through September, however, snow often frosts Tutapaka's 19,000-foot crest, and the temperature tumbles from a midday average of 60 degrees to 20 below zero at night. As if to temper this frigid attitude, nature provides a growing fuel supply, a fungus-like plant called ureta. Dried, it makes an excellent fire. Nature also has conditioned the Indians of this area to work at altitudes that make most people reach for the oxygen mask, even in a plane. These workers were enlisted to lay the concrete pipe that will carry water from Suche Lake to the Pampa de Vaca Reservoir some 10 miles above the mine. Construction work on the earth-filled Pampa de Vaca Dam and Reservoir involved the moving of 185,000 cubic yards of earth. At 2 points, the pipeline crosses an old canal built in the Toquepala Valley by the Inca Indians many years ago. The pipeline's path is not all downgrade. Here, Indian labor is excavating a trench for a siphon covering a 600-foot rise from the bottom of the valley. And so, the Toquepala project has its water system. Today on Lake Suche, the mud hens and ducks, the trout and the geese, and even flamingos find a serene refuge in a magnificent natural setting. From the intake barge, water is being pumped out to the mine at the rate of 18,000 gallons a minute through more than 40 miles of one of the world's highest major concrete pipelines. A pipeline that here is getting its final cover of select material. Then through the mile-long steel siphon, and finally to the storage tanks in the mill area. In the beginning, Toquepala was a target, a plan for a mining project. Today, less than 3.5 years later, Toquepala is a living and operating mine facility. This way, over the years, the ore will move to the pride of the Toquepala project, the gigantic mill down the canyon. Into the primary crusher, a daily load of 20 to 25,000 tons of run-of-mine ore is dumped to start on its reducing regimen. Through the secondary crusher, and then as fine ore into bins along the east wall of the huge concentrator building. In that great building, one of the larger concentrators in the world, begins the modern alchemy of grinding and classification, of flux and flotation, that will turn the crude ore into concentrate at the rate of more than 1,000 tons a day. From the platform of a traveling crane, we can see the panorama of great grinding mills, ball mills and rod mills, through which the ore passes. When the copper concentrate has been recovered from the pulp, it is conditioned in thickeners and then filtered. The waste materials or tailings are partially dewatered in these large pools, and the recovered water returned for use in the milling operations. The tailings are carried to the disposal areas. From the mill, the ore trains are winding along the new roadbed. Finally, on the Elo flats, the ore trains will deliver the raw materials to the smelter, where in the furnaces and converters, concentrates will be turned into the blister copper that has been its destiny since the Toquepala ore was first discovered. The power that makes this destiny possible is generated in this ultra-modern plant, capable of handling the electricity needs of a small city, which indeed it does. The power plant is fired by fuel oil, pumped in through the submarine pipeline from tankers lying offshore, and stored in these 3,300,000 gallon capacity tanks. Seawater for the plant is pumped in through this intake on the shore. Once generated, the power starts for the project areas from this switchyard. It is carried up to the mine area by the 52-mile-long transmission line, supported by sturdy poles and crossing rugged mountain terrain. At the Elo River, the line leaps the valley in its green olive groves, a 2,200-foot span, longest stretch of unsupported wire in the entire system. Finally, at the mine, the electricity reaches this substation near the mill and goes to its work of powering southern Peru's mighty copper mining operation. But the story of a mine is more than just a story of machines and steel and mountains being moved. It is the story of people, the men of Southern Peru Copper Corporation and Utah MK, the staff and the workers. It is the story of the community that has been built for them and their families, a complete community of modern homes and schools, a new hotel for their visitors, recreational facilities for everyone, a modern hospital for their sick. Church ringing their message of faith to the people. It is a beautiful church, one that would grace any community in the world, modern as the mining town it serves, ancient in its roots, beyond the legends of the Incas. Dedicated on June 21st, 1959, it will stand through the decades in the high reaches of the Andes as a symbol of the aspirations that lead men to explore the world they live in and to develop its riches, make it a better world for everyone. This is the story of Toquepala, the story of a construction triumph high in the Andes, of how in less than years there has been created one of the greatest copper mine facilities in the world. mine is in the hands of the owner in full operation. Project manager Richardson Seeley calls it a mission accomplished. Not far from Hilo, travelers on the Pan American Highway see a road sign at the point where the mine highway heads off up into the mountains. It is like an arrow aimed at a target. A target on which Utah MK have scored a bullseye for Southern Peru Copper Corporation. A bullseye scored 8 months ahead of the time set for target Toquepala.